Here are the best and the worst heroes in Marvel Rivals Season 0, sorted by class so you know what to pick. From worst to best, let's dive into it. We're starting off the C tier with C for Captain America. Captain America has to be the biggest disappointment out of all the tanks in Marvel Rivals. He has a wide kit with so many opportunities to deal damage, but in reality, all of his abilities just feel super weak. And while he has a lot of ways that he can do damage, in reality, they don't actually make any meaningful difference. He can be a good pick to chase down a DPS who's out of position, but as far as actual tanking goes, he doesn't have that much of an impact. So that's why he goes into the C tier. Moving on into the B tier, we'll start it off with Penny Parker. In reality, she's more of a big damage dealer and cheesy pick more so than a real tank. You could argue that she's a bit of an off tank, I guess, but since all of her damage relies on her spider nest, which people are starting to learn how to break and focus, this just means that she does nothing most of the time. You know, other than the occasional stun, but that's just not enough, which keeps her in the B tier. I could see some value in picking her for a anti-dive composition or something like that so you can stun the divers, but it's very niche and I wouldn't run it most of the time anyways. Which brings us to another hero that kind of just stays alive, and that's Venom. Venom's entire kit just revolves around staying alive for as long as humanly possible with a massive health pool combined with a ton of sustainabilities, which can be good if you need bodies on the point or if you want to pull off a coordinated dive. But more often than not, he does lack versatility or any defensive abilities that can consistently support or enable his team rather than himself, which sadly keeps Venom in the B tier. But moving on into the A tier, there are quite a few choices, with the first one coming to mind being the Hulk. This one might be a bit of a controversial pick, but as far as off-tanking goes, he is incredibly strong. Since he jumps around a lot, he can pressure the backline, he can help his tank line, and even support his own team at any point during the same fight. The rest of his kit is a great mix of supportive and shutting down the enemy plays thanks to his shield as well as his stun. His ultimate takes this to the next level too, since it lets you discombobulate the enemy teams and stay alive forever. You can even choose to kill a person by juggling them around. And if you don't want to do that, you can also just use your ability on one target to shut them down for a really long time. Hulk is a great high skill, I guess some risk, but high reward all-rounder tank, but he can't really do too much on his own, which is why he is relegated to the A tier. He's worth playing on all types of maps when we are defending or attacking, as long as you have another S tier tank holding the front line, and his team-ups make Iron Man and Doctor Strange a lot stronger, which is another great reason to run Hulk in the first place. But moving on, we have Groot. He's sort of in the same seat and is generally a great hero for defending. The ability to stay alive, creating space, and cutting enemies off from their supports makes pushing into a good Groot pretty difficult. The ultimate is pretty solid, most importantly for forcing the enemy team's defensive ultimates, but all in all you will rarely get much out of it without your team closely following up or combining their ultimates. Attacking with a Groot is a bit questionable, since he mostly succeeds in stealing space from the enemy teams rather than taking space himself. The lack of versatility and the fact that he generally succeeds on one side but not the other keeps him in the A tier. Next up we have Thor. Thor is also in a sort of an off-tank role, and he provides space through staying alive and dealing damage and the occasional displacement, but most of the time he just deals damage. Thor does a decent job of staying alive and applying pressure by staying alive and slapping enemies. He can also get some good picks with his dash, but overall he's a bit awkward to use due to the Thor Force mechanic, and his ultimate is easy to dodge or counter, making it pretty unreliable. But if you need somebody else on the front line that deals good damage, then Thor can be a good choice, which is why I think he belongs in the A tier. But there are obviously better choices for tanks, so we're gonna hop into the S tier, which consists of the two shield tanks in Marvel Rivals. Both are pretty solid, but the last one of the two really sticks out on its own. Starting off, we have Magneto. Magneto is a truly amazing strong all-rounder tank with a great all-around kit who can deal tons of damage while also defending their teammates and themselves with both their shield and bubbles. Not to mention that the ultimates can be huge, both to shut down enemy damage ultimates as well as to get picks that can really turn the tides of the battle. Not to mention that if you get enough of a charge on your meatball, you can even one-shot the supports mid-ultimate. He can also work as a solo tank, but thrives the most when coupled with other tanks such as Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange is probably the best tank in the game right now. Not only does he have a versatile kit, even more so than Magneto, but it does everything that any other tank does in the game, but better. He's not only a shield tank like Magneto, but he can also fly, which lets him shut down difficult ultimates like Hela's or even Magneto's at the source. His dark magic passive lets him deal a ton of outgoing damage, and when coupled with his shield, this makes him very hard to kill and a real threat that you just cannot ignore. His teleport ability has an unlimited amount of potential for plays, but will usually let you take the best position for a team fight at the start of every game, which lets you set your team up for success every time. But that was it for the tanks, the Vanguards, so let's talk about the DPS, the Duelists. So starting off all the way down on the E tier, we have Wolverine. Now, Wolverine can be a good pick, but he just isn't. He doesn't have too much damage when it comes to squishy targets. He doesn't have that much survivability. Sure, he can shred some tanks occasionally, and he can grab somebody and, you know, maybe secure a kill or put somebody out of position so the whole team can dive on them and kill them, in addition to his claws dealing additional damage against tanky targets. But generally speaking, his health pool is just not high enough. He's a melee hero, so he's very easy to shut down and just kill if he gets a bit of focus. I have seen some Wolverine in the top 500, but I don't think it is nearly viable or consistent enough to make him a viable choice. Another hero in the E tier is of course going to be Storm. A lot of people give me flack for rating her low previously, but I still stand by it. I don't think she is that good, especially in the current version of the game. Sure, she can enable her team to get a little bit of a movement speed going, and she can enable them to do a little bit more damage, but overall she doesn't deal that much damage herself. The ultimate, I think, was nerfed because it does not do nearly as much damage as I remember. It's actually really easy to just shoot it and counter it, and her primary fire doesn't really make much sense either because it does cleave through enemies, it does pierce and deal a ton of damage, but because she's a flyer, you rarely will get to do pierce damage with it. Overall, she is just kind of underwhelming. Very easy to kill. Her hitbox is massive, and unless you're doing some specific compositions, there's not much of a reason to play her. But that was it for the E tier, so let's move on into the D tier, starting off with Black Panther. And I know somebody's gonna come at me and say, hey, Black Panther is actually really good. He's like Genji, but worse because he's a melee hero. The whole playstyle relies around, okay, you gotta do this really difficult combo. You gotta get these stacks on your enemies so you can dive them and do resets on them. You gotta chain your mark, and then you gotta dash through them, you get another mark and dash through them, and keep doing that until they die. And if you do it the wrong way, you just end up dying. Sure, with very good movement, positioning, and timing, you can make it work, but against coordinated teams, against good players, you will rarely get to do that. And the amount of effort you need to do to perform as well as any other hero is just not worth it. Sure, there is a team up with Magic, which can make him a little bit better, but overall, I don't see the point of having him, which is why he belongs in the D tier. Moving on though, we have Spider-Man, who kind of suffers from the same fates, but he's actually easier to play than Black Panther. So I would argue that Spider-Man might be a better choice than Black Panther. If anything, especially if you're running a dive alongside a Venom, you get a very cool power-up, which helps with your full one-shot combo. If Spider-Man hits his mark on an enemy, he can practically one-shot a squishy just by zooming into them and doing some melees and an uppercut, and then they usually just die, especially, again, if you add the Venom team-up. But on his own, he's not that good. He's not as reliable when it comes to damage, and he is very difficult to use to perform what most other heroes can do without much effort at all. I will say that there is potential for Spider-Man, but as with Black Panther, if he gets focused, there's not much he can really do. And the lack of versatility and the difficulty in using him keeps him in the D tier. And another hero in the D tier that maybe should be a bit higher, but I still feel like she belongs here, is going to be Squirrel Girl. In a way, you could argue she's like a mix of Hela from Marvel Rivals and Junkrat from Overwatch, in the sense that you kind of just spam projectiles, and yeah, they deal a ton of damage, but you need to actually hit enemies with the projectiles, and it's very difficult to do for a, well, if you could like 2-3 tap a squishy, you'll kill them, but it's a lot of effort. And when it comes to her abilities, generally speaking, they don't have, in my opinion, enough of a viability to make her worth it. One of her abilities is just letting her do her other abilities twice, and those abilities are either doing a really big jump, which really, and the other ability admittedly does snare a person for a short period of time. I just don't think it's worth it enough to really make her a viable pick overall. But you can use her as a cheese pick. She does have certain uses. She does have a team up with Spider-Man that gives her pretty solid team up ability, but she's not really worth playing most of the time. With certain comps, against certain comps, for example, if enemies are grouped up a lot, I can see the value, but generally speaking, you're better off with something else. For example, the heroes in the C tier. One of those being Iron Fist. Now, Iron Fist is a bit weird because as with Black Panther and Spider-Man, you know, if he gets focused, he can't do as much, in part on account of him being a melee hero, but he's so much easier to play than Black Panther or Spider-Man that he just works. He can be nearly invincible thanks to his block, and he can stick to any target and win practically any duel against any squishy, maybe even certain tanks, if he just sticks on them for long enough. Again, if he does get focused by the DPS, he can usually not do too much, but he still has a higher potential in shutting down specific enemies, and he doesn't really have a direct counter as most other heroes in this list does. Now, his damage isn't insane. It might not be as consistent, which is why I think he belongs in the C tier. Another hero in the C tier is going to be Iron Man. Now, Iron Man can be ranked higher. We're gonna get to that in a little bit, but I think as a whole, as a general ranking, I think he's a C tier hero. He has a decent damage potential. Yeah, you can float around and you can shoot down on the enemies and deal a ton of damage with poke, or you can just beam somebody with a decent amount of damage with your secondary fire, and your ultimate, obviously, you can wipe an entire team, especially especially if you combine it with other ultimates, assuming it wasn't blocked. But one of the major problems for Iron Man is actually his strength. He's a flyer. He wants to be up in the sky. The problem with that is that it makes him a very easy target. He's very clunky and very easy to kill if you catch up to him, even as an Iron Fist, to be honest. Because of Iron Man being a flyer, his counter is going to be any high damage heroes, especially ones without projectiles, such as Hela or the Punisher or even Star-Lord. And you're noticing a pattern. These are heroes we haven't mentioned yet because they're farther down the list other than one of them. Even Hawkeye will destroy Iron Man because Iron Man is a big squishy red target in the sky. Anyone can kill him. So as long as all of these heroes are available and up and not banned, assuming you're Diamond Plus lobbies, Iron Man should not be able to do too much. But if you do ban 1 or 2 hit scan heroes, let's say Hawkeye and Hela or Punisher or whatever, then all of a sudden Iron Man has a lot more space to work with. The more hit scan heroes that are banned, the more space it has to work with, which could actually bump him up to like a B tier or A tier, especially if you combine him with teaming up with Hulk, which makes Iron Man's damage honestly hit really, really hard against the right targets. But as an overall pick, I'd say somewhere in the middle in the C tier. Moving on, we have Scarlet Witch. Now, Witch used to be a really good pick, not on her own, but because of the fact that she gave Magneto a really strong power-up. The problem is that with Scarlet Witch, sure, she does consistent damage. She can kind of deal a decent amount of damage with her primary fire and secondary fire, and she can kind of stun with her E ability. But overall, she doesn't really pack enough of a punch. In lower elo, you can see her winning a lot of duels, but as soon as she starts fighting players who can actually shoot back, her damage potential is just too low, and she gets out-traded with most heroes on the roster. Her ultimate is sort of suffering from the same fate, where it doesn't really do much against players who know what they're doing, who either just shoot her when she shows herself out of ult because they know the timings or her health, or just, you know, get out of the way and get behind cover. She has like a much worse diva ult if you would compare it to Overwatch terms, and I don't think that she has nearly enough of a potential as she did. For example, in closed beta, at least the Magneto power was worth playing for, but I think it was nerfed, so it's not really worth it anymore, which is why she sort of belongs to the C tier. Now moving on in the C tier, we have Star-Lord. Maybe this guy deserves to be a little bit higher, but I'm going to keep him somewhere here in the middle. Star-Lord has a lot of damage potential. He's very high skill, high reward, a very strong duelist, but he is pretty easy to hit, and if he doesn't have any space to work around, he just straight up dies. His ultimate can be good, but it's very easy to counter with most ultimates, so I just have a hard time seeing where he belongs other than in the C tier. He does have a way of being able to shut down certain targets. I mentioned Iron Man previously, but again, on its own, he's just not enough to make him a viable choice, and once we get to the later parts of this video, it'll make more sense, which we're going to do now. We're going to talk about B tier. So starting off, we have Moon Knight. Now, Moon Knight is pretty solid on his own. He does have a team up, doesn't make too much of a difference. It does help a little bit in certain duels, but the amount of damage that Moon Knight can output is absolutely insane, especially against clumped enemies, or just about any enemy if you can get a good unk off. The thing is with Moon Knight is that he has a full one-shot combo that you can do nothing about if he does it right, where he just puts the unk down and he does like a weird animation cancel. We're going to cover that in a different video, so subscribe. And it just deletes anyone who happens to be close enough if they are a squishy target or low enough. The ultimate is super strong with no counterplay. As far as I know, there's nothing you can do. There's no shields that block his ultimate. So if the enemies don't get out of the way, or if they're stuck, for example, from Groot's ult to Doctor Strange's ult, they'll just straight up die. It has an incredibly high damage per second. So he has a lot of potential, but I always am going to be hesitant of any type of projectile DPS without too much over versatility. Sure, he has some movement abilities, but it's not something that makes a big difference when push actually comes to shove. Moving on, we have Magic. Now, Magic can be really, really, really good, but she can also be really, really bad. She's kind of clunky when you compare her to other divers. She's still good. She's almost like a pseudo tank. You can pick her if you want more pressure on the front line. So if you have 2 tanks diving, yeah, let's just pick up Magic and she'll stay alive and deal a ton of damage herself. But she can only dive. You can't use her in any other composition where it makes sense. You need her to be diving in the front line. She's too niche down in a certain role, which is why I kind of think that she belongs in the B tier. After that, we have Black Widow. Now, some of you guys might be surprised by the Black Widow being this high up, but I have a very good reason, so hear me out. Black Widow is very niche. She only does one thing, and then she doesn't really serve much of a purpose afterwards. Black Widow is a little bit like Hawkeye in a sense, or like Widowmaker in Overwatch, where you can use her at, say, at the start of the game or at any point in the game where you want to get an entry pick, especially if Mantis isn't banned, because Black Widow doesn't one-shot a squishy. She leaves him with like 10 health or something. But if Mantis damage boosts her, or she really receives any damage boost for that matter, she will deal enough damage damage to one-shot headshot a squishy. So you could use Black Widow just to open up a point and push in. I just wouldn't use her throughout the entire game, as she loses value very fast. She doesn't have much of a self-peel. She doesn't have much of a utility other than dealing a ton of damage over long range. A little bit more consistently than Hawkeye, for example, but Hawkeye is a lot better, which we're going to get to in a little bit. And then the last hero we want to talk about is, of course, Namor. I don't know how to pronounce it, and I'm not going to learn anytime soon. This guy is mostly useful on defense. I've seen him attack, and I've never seen it actually work, but basically by putting starts down, he takes control of space that other heroes might struggle with taking. He has a pretty high damage potential with his left click if you can really hit the projectiles that well, especially because it doesn't have to be reloaded. And the right click can also hit pretty hard. The self peel isn't the best, but again, it's not too much about him as much as it is about his turrets and just enabling his team to have more consistent damage. And you know, if the enemy team doesn't deal with Namor's turrets, they're just going to keep chunking them down to low health. But one of the main reasons Namor is really good is because of his ultimate, the Whale, which deals, I believe, 500 damage in the middle and then 300 damage to anyone surrounding it, and it knocks down anyone who gets hit by the ultimate, which means that you can get a lot of CC and a lot of damage on enemies that don't get out of the way, which can be enough to shut down an entire push if they do come. Again, you can use him to attack, but you need to be able to play off of that Whale, and he's not really that useful until you get the ultimate, which is why he kind of belongs in the B tier, because he's a little bit too niche down. But you can still use him in these very specific situations, in which case you could consider him like an A tier hero, or maybe even like a little bit better. But moving on into the A tier, we're gonna have some pretty solid picks, which you could argue could be S tier, but once we get to the S tier, that part will make a lot more sense. Starting off, we have Hawkeye, who I mentioned previously. Extremely good hero. There's probably not many heroes in the game that can completely change how a match plays out like Hawkeye can. In about a second or so of building his focus and then charging his arrow, he can one-shot almost every half squishy hero in the roster, and he can two-shot almost every tank if he hits double headshots. His damage potential is insanely high. He has a massive kit with a double jump. He can knock enemies back. It's a hypersonic arrow that nobody really uses. And of course, he can even deflect incoming projectiles. So that's more of a style point thing. I don't think anyone actually does that. Overall, I'd say that just being able to spam arrows into the enemy team and getting picks for free makes him so good at what he does. You don't even need to aim. Just aim in a general direction and you can get 3 or 4 kills without even trying. And this really just makes him stand out so much more from other heroes. The problem is that he is a projectile hero. He is a little bit inconsistent. His ultimate, while it's convenient for Hawkeye, I guess it doesn't make too much of a difference in a fight. Most teams just usually kite away from it or get behind shields and it won't really do much. So he will get you picks. He's probably one of the best choices, if not the best choice for getting picks. But overall, he just doesn't do enough to make him anywhere higher than A tier. But A tier is still very good, mind you. And not to mention that this guy is practically permabanned in, I guess, Diamond or above. And maybe he should be an S tier, but I'll keep him now. Otherwise, the S tier will be too stacked. Moving on, we have the Punisher. Punisher is absolutely insanely good. Probably one of the best tank busters in the game with a crazy high damage potential. Not only does his damage potential with his just normal assault rifle blow any other heroes out of the water, but the shotgun itself destroys tanks, can one-shot enemies that get too close if it's a diver or whatnot, which just gives him a ton of potential damage. If you only use the Punisher's first and second weapon, you will be fine on your own, assuming you can hit your shots. Seeing as he has a hit scan, it's pretty damn easy. He also has a turret, which is pretty nice. It helps you dodge Jeff ultimates. It helps you dish out a ton of damage. Sure, it's projectile, but it's AoE damage. It deals twice the amount of damage as your assault rifle, as I understand it, and he gives you 1,000 health, so it makes it very hard to kill you during attack. His ultimate as well is, well, you know, it's pretty easy to counter it, just kind of run out of the way. But most of the time, a well-placed ultimate can win you entire fights because the damage potential from this thing is absolutely insane. If you happen to have a Rocket Raccoon on your team, this makes the Punisher even stronger. And he's just an overall solid dude. He's usually not good enough to get banned, so he's usually available, but he usually falls below the radar, despite being so good. The last hero in the A tier is going to be Winter Soldier. Bucky is absolutely great, one of the GOATs. I am not that good at him because he's not a hit scan hero, but the potential here for outplacing damage is just too big to pass up on. Not only does his primary fire deal a ton of damage, but it gets reset by using any of his abilities, which means you can chain his abilities so you just constantly keep firing. His hook lets him hook in one or several targets and pull them towards him, which you then can follow up with on his knock-up ability to knock him even deeper, which can secure you a pick on any hero that you want. You can pull a tank out of position, you can pull a support out of position into your team. As long as your teammates follow up on it, he is incredibly good, sort of in the same sense that a Hawkeye would be, but Winter Soldier has a better survivability because every time he uses an ability, he also gets bonus health. His ultimate is also massive because of the again, which lets him keep pummeling through enemy teams without them really having a way to fight back, other than killing him, I guess. So Hawkeye, the Punisher, and Winter Soldier are all in A tier. I don't think they belong in a specific order, but they're all very solid and can dish out a ton of damage, but there's always something missing. As for Winter Soldier, I think he's just a little bit niche, a little bit too inconsistent to consider a S tier hero, but he's still very consistent and very, very good. So what are the S tier heroes? These have basically no real flaw and are basically just good in every single way. The first one of these will of course be Hela, and we're gonna leave the last one as a bit of a surprise. Hela is incredibly good, obviously. She has a hit scan. She fires slowly, but it deals a ton of damage. During the season, she has 20% damage boost, so she just destroys anything she shoots. If it's a tank, if it's a support, if it's a DPS, anything she shoots at disappears. No matter whether you go for headshots or body shots. Her passive makes the enemies she kills explode, which means that she deals even more damage. Her bird lets her fly around and stay alive for much longer if she does get dove, assuming she doesn't just kill the diver with her primary fire or her stun ability. And of course, her ultimate is a game changer on its own. It gives her 10,000 health, elevates her and lets her 2-tap any squishy that might be underneath her. And the enemy teams have to play around this ultimate, or she's just gonna wipe their backline. She is good in every single way. And because she forces the entire team to play around her in every single way, that just really puts her in an S tier for me. Not to mention that if you team her up with Loki or Thor, this also makes them spawn instantly when she gets a kill, and she is going to get a kill because she is that damn strong. She's also permabanned in Diamond Plus, but what can you do? Another hero that is absolutely great, that doesn't get as many bans, but is still insanely good, is Psylocke. Now, Hela is probably a better hero, but you don't get to play her. Psylocke is a bit slept on, if anything. Psylocke has a massive damage potential. She has an almost one-shot combo if you combo her left click and her dash. So if you're playing her in sort of a dive composition or just on your own looking for picks, she just outputs so much damage. If you consistently just sit back and plunk away with your primary fire, you will destroy any enemy that comes at you. And seeing as you have double dashes and an invisibility, you can either set up flanks however you want or escape from a bad position and get out, even if you're deep within the enemy team's, I guess, space. And these things are all good on their own, but the thing that sets Psylocke apart from most of her heroes is probably her ultimate. There's not really much of an answer to Psylocke's ultimate, where she just jumps between enemies and deal a ton of damage every time she jumps between them. You can't shoot her back or anything like that. The only way to survive is either by getting out of her area of effect or by burning a defensive ultimate or grouping up, or sometimes you even have to do both because of the sheer amount of damage and focus she outputs. Psylocke's ultimate is really good, and if the enemy team does not play around it, it can wipe an entire team or make enough of a difference against an entire team that it wins you the fight for free. And even though Hela's ult is great and makes you play around it, it does not have the same effect on the outcome of a game that Psylocke's ult does. But that was it for the Duelists, so let's talk Strategists, the support. Now, generally speaking, all supports are going to be moderately viable, but some are going to be a little bit more viable than the others. Starting off in the B tier, we have Jeff. Jeff is okay. He can give a cleave heal to all of his teammates that are close enough. He has a pretty decent self-peel thanks to his bubbles and just his overall little fin ability. And his ultimate can be a game changer where you can just throw an entire team off of the point. That being said though, he is pretty cheesy and his overall outgoing healing isn't really that much when you compare to the other heroes in the roster. And all of his value just comes down to his ultimate rather than actually being a good support or healer. And seeing as all he provides is heals and then a cheesy play, I can't really put him any higher than in the B tier. And over here in the B tier is going to be Loki, who is very popular in ranked, and maybe I should rate him higher, but I believe Loki is more of a playmaking style hero rather than a consistent healing support hero. If I have a Loki on my team, I can usually expect that he won't be healing that well. In most cases, the most of Loki's value as a support comes from his rune, which makes anyone standing inside of it not take any damage. On the contrary, they get heals if they do get any incoming damage. But that's about it. His actual heal isn't that high. Even if he has all of his clones up shooting at somebody, it doesn't really heal that well compared to the other heroes farther down on this list. Again, because of his ultimate, you can turn the tides of a game completely by cloning. You can even clone an actual good healer and heal all of your team and then pop a great ultimate. But overall, he doesn't serve that much use outside of his ultimate that makes me feel like he's worth anything more than the B tier. I will mention though that there is some additional value for Loki if you are playing a Hela, because obviously maybe he will get a revive, but overall I don't think it's that much worth it. And over here I will put in the B tier that might belong higher, but a lot of these really comes down to your playstyle and the team that you're running. But I'm just looking at the overall viability is going to be Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger does have a lot of potential, pretty good self-healing and a pretty wide kit as far as supporting goes, but the outgoing heals aren't really that strong until you start using your ultimate, which will make your team basically unstoppable inside of it. It does give you a lot of space over the course of the ultimate, because if an enemy steps on it, they're gonna have to fight people that basically cannot die and taking additional damage from the cloak side of Cloak and Dagger at the same time. But overall, I would say that the consistent heals aren't really there. The self-healing is okay, but killing a Cloak and Dagger as a solo DPS is honestly too easy to consider them be able to actually survive on their own. All in all, I see some value, but I'd rather just play the other heroes in the A or S tier instead. Speaking of which, when we hop into the A tier for strategists, we're gonna start off with Adam Warlock, who might be even higher up on the list if you're in a full stack, if you're in a more serious environment, if you're playing a scrim or a tournament or a 6-man stack in ranked, because Adam's heals are okay, but not insanely good. His passive is pretty decent as he can get away and revive, but the real power lies in two of his abilities. First being, obviously, you're gonna say his ultimate. He can revive his entire team, and anyone who dies during the duration of his ultimate will also get a revive. Sure, they won't be full health, but they'll come back. And if you combine Adam Warlock with a, for example, Mantis can pop her ult immediately after the revive, which means that Adam brings all the dead teammates back, and then Mantis ultimates to top them all up, and then you got another shot at winning the fight in front of you. And there's a high chance that you're gonna end up winning it because the enemy team probably burnt a lot of their abilities, maybe even had somebody picked, use all the ultimates to make this fight happen in the first place. But a very underrated part of Adam's kit is going to be, well, obviously his damage as well, but specifically his bond. The bond gives a little bit of healing to any surrounding teammates, up to the entire team, and it negates so much incoming damage that it practically makes your teammates invulnerable for a short period of time. It is incredibly strong and will save your team more often than not. And again, if you are playing a coordinated fight and you use it in the right way, it can completely turn the tides of that fight. That being said, it's a pretty long cooldown on it, so you only get to use it every once in a while. And seeing as you do miss out on a lot of healing or very strong reactive ultimates like Luna Snow or Mantis, I cannot in good faith put him in S tier, but it is very good because of seeing as it relies a lot on your team playing together, and in most cases the team won't. In comp they will, but you know, most of you guys watching are probably not playing tournaments, so we'll keep it in the A tier for now. Another strategist in the A tier is going to be Rocket Raccoon. Rocket Raccoon has great survivability, a great team up with Winter Soldier and with the Punisher that lets him deal a ton of damage, and most importantly, Rocket Raccoon can give out cookies that heal up any nearby teammates, that gives any nearby teammates bonus health, which makes them tankier, but most importantly, it brings them back to full life if they manage to get picked. In a way, you could compare it to Adam Warlock, except it's for one person instead of many, which you could argue means it's a bit more viable if you have one problem child on the team. His heals is okay, nothing to write home about, and his ultimate enables his entire team to deal a lot of damage, but overall I feel like his heals are a little bit too unreliable, maybe not consistent enough to make Rocket Raccoon worth it over the S tier picks for strategists. So what are those? Starting off, we have Luna Snow. Luna Snow probably has one of the highest, if not the highest, healing potential in the game. She not only has her hit scan heal, which just heals a ton, but she also output a ton of damage on any flankers or flyers. She can self-peel by freezing anyone coming at her. She can self-heal with her clapping ability, and of course she can even put a permanent heal on one of your own flankers, and it don't need to stay within line of sight or within range or anything. It just stays upon them until Luna Snow or the flanker dies. It is very strong and enables a lot of flanking plays. Her ultimate, as you know, is incredibly strong, and it's very hard to do anything for its very long duration. It can turn the tides of a fight or save a fight completely, either giving all your teammates a very strong healing or a damage boost. You should probably swap between the two. And if you would compare it to, let's say, Rocket Raccoon in the A tier, his ultimate just gives a damage boost while Luna's gives both, which immediately makes it a lot more useful. And then another hero that belongs in the S tier. Both of these are really good. Ideally, you might even want both at the same time. They're just too solid on their own that you really don't need anything else than these two heroes. Both Luna Snow and Mantis have very consistent supportive ultimates that heal up their teammates and more, which just allows them to keep their teammates alive through almost every single ult in the game. And that's just a value that no other hero, in addition to just having very consistent healing outputs, which no other strategist really can do. Mantis can not only output a decent amount of damage, but she can spam heals, she can damage amp, as we mentioned previously, for example, Black Widow, or somebody who does deal a lot of damage normally, to deal even more damage and basically one-shot enemies. Just like with Luna Snow, she has a self-peel through the sleep, and she gets a movement speed. I forgot to mention that for Luna Snow, but she also uses movement speed when they're out of a fight, which means that if they do get picked, this lets them come back to the point pretty damn fast. It's also worth mentioning that Mantis, again, has a team up with Adam, which means that if you have both of these on your team, if Mantis does get picked for some reason, she can still revive herself in Cocoon somewhere close and get back into the fight even sooner. She has a very high uptime if you have both Adam Warlock and Mantis at the same time. And as I mentioned, with the healing ultimate for Mantis, it is extremely good as it provides consistent healing to any teammates nearby, but it also lets her use her abilities and shoot at the same time, while also speeding up any teammates that are close enough. So when you combine all of these things together, it just makes her a very solid all-rounder hero, just like Luna Snow, with a slightly different playstyle, which can keep their team up for so long, who can stay up and stay alive very easily. And it's just a S-tier pick for me when it comes to picking my own strategist. Mantis gets banned a ton because of her viability, but if you manage to play her, you probably should. But that was it for all of the heroes. If you guys have opinions on my takes, which I'm pretty sure some of you guys will, let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.